Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, a new policy to handle asylum seekers at the border. We have live reports from San Ysidro Port of Entry on the new processing plants. Plus, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson is in town to address the homeless crisis across the nation, his plans for the problem. And one local assembly member is pushing to end gun shows at the Del Mar Fairgrounds. Details on the proposed legislation. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. New migrant protection protocols are being implemented at the San Ysidro Port of Entry. Local and national leaders toured there today to take a look. KPBS border reporter Jean Guerrero is live there now with more on how this affects asylum seekers. Jean.
Hey, Ebony. Congressman Juan Vargas and Scott Peters welcomed House Majority Leader Hoyer for the tour with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Congressman Mike Levin was there as well. The congressman condemned the new return to Mexico policy, saying it wasn't humane because asylum seekers aren't safe in Mexico amid record homicides in Tijuana. About 73 people have been returned to Mexico under the policy so far. But Mr. Hoyer instead focused on the positives of the port of entry. Here's that bite.
It has a capacity which allows for people to be dealt with in a humane, healthy, fair, just way. And that's what we need, frankly, at all of our border entry points.
They all said that the national emergency that President Trump has declared at the border isn't real, saying that instead the country needs, if it wants border security, it needs to invest in infrastructure such as we have here at the San Ysidro Port of Entry, more personnel, more technology, and other types of investment to streamline the processing of individuals and cargo as well. For reporting from the border, Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
Jean, can you tell us why are people calling this a fake crisis at the border and instead saying it's more of a humanitarian concern?
Right. So the congressmen really, they all emphasize this idea that there is no emergency at the border. They said it's a fake crisis that President Trump is alluding to. But what I asked them about was the fact that they themselves and nonprofits in San Diego and migrant advocacy groups have said that there is in fact a crisis at the border. It's a humanitarian crisis. And what the congressman told me is that essentially the reason they call it a fake crisis is because President Trump's focus is very much on building this wall, which they say is a false solution to a humanitarian crisis, which requires, again, more personnel and other resources to process individuals in a fair and humane way at the ports of entry. Back to you.
Thanks, Jean. A federal judge in San Diego is deciding a family separation case that could expand to impact thousands of migrant children. The family reunification order last summer only applied to separated children in government custody. But now Judge Dana Sabra says what he didn't know at the time was that these separations actually dated back to 2017 and potentially impacted thousands of more children. Sabra says the U.S. should provide information on all families separated unlawfully by the Trump administration. Government attorneys, though, say expanding the case would be an invasive burden. Judge Sabra is set to rule in the next few days. U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson comes to San Diego to address the homeless crisis. He spoke at a conference near downtown, which focused on solutions to get unsheltered adults off the streets. Before that speech, KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman caught up with Carson during a tour of homeless shelters.
Secretary Carson came here today to the Alpha Project's homeless shelter. He says it costs more to help people on the streets, and programs like this actually work.
You leave somebody out on the street, you know, what happens to them? Very frequently, they have significant medical issues. They wind up in the emergency room. Quite frankly, you know, 3 or 4 days in the hospital costs way more than a year of support here. You know, we really have to start thinking about these things and what really saves us money.
Carson was given a tour of the homeless shelter by Bob McElroy, who is CEO of the Alpha Project.
But you'll notice the condition of this place and the neighborhood. I tell our folks, this is your house. If you abuse it, you're going to lose it.
Carson saw firsthand how the city of San Diego is working to get people off the streets. About 320 people stay in this shelter.
Get them stabilized so when we do get them into housing, then our staff helps them manage those so they're not back out in the street in a year.
Carson says he wants more programs like tent shelters that help people get off the streets. He also wants them to provide proof of their success.
There are a lot of good programs around the country. We need more. And absolutely, we need people to have faith in their fellow human beings who have programs like this where you can actually see the results. And again, from the federal point of view, what we are doing is we are really concentrating on data. We are concentrating on evidence.
McElroy says he's glad the secretary came to see firsthand how temporary homeless shelters can work.
He understands the issue. He understands everything from the need for the shelters, obviously. You've got to have a starting point. You can't provide the service that we provide to a transient population out on the sidewalks.
The Alpha Project tent shelter, as well as 2 others in the city, have funding to stay open through June. The San Diego Housing Commission, who pays to keep the shelters running, says it will recommend keeping them open past that. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
A San Diego park may be getting a curfew after seniors complain about crime. A local board gave preliminary approval after complaints that the park drew crime near a senior living facility. The building's residents and management say people in the City Heights Square mini park are causing violence and using drugs. The curfew proposal now goes to the City Council for review. This week, we're taking a look back at the murders of 2 San Diego women killed 15 years ago in San Diego's Lincoln Park community. We've reviewed the ripple effects the killings had on policing and the community. Tonight, KPBS investigative reporter Claire Tragesser examines the effect these murders had on the families.
And that's what we're supposed to be reflecting.
A few weeks after I went to the midnight New Year's Eve service at True Faith Church, I was back at a regular Sunday service. This time, I was hoping to meet the family of Carol Waits, one of the 2 women killed in the Dr. J's shooting. They still attend the same church she was on her way home from when she was caught in the crossfire of a gang shooting. After the service, I met Janice Waits, the little girl who was in the backseat of the car when her grandmother was shot.
It's kind of like a 3-year-old type of memory, you know, for me. Like, I think there was a dragon there, and it was kind of like a story from a fairy tale or an action movie, you know. That to me is what my memory is, but as I get older and I realize that that's not exactly what happened.
Her second cousin, who was 7 years old at the time, shielded her with his body and was shot multiple times but survived. Janice Waits doesn't really remember that, but she knows her life would have been very different if her grandmother hadn't been killed. Janice seems to be flourishing. She's 18 now, a freshman in college, but says she thinks she'd be even more well-mannered, as she puts it, if her grandmother was alive.
From what I hear, she was very strict in certain places. Despite me being her favorite, I do see like me wearing more dresses, me being a lot more cleaner around the house.
The bigger impact was on her mom, who didn't want to do a recorded interview. They left San Diego after the murder and didn't want to come back until someone was convicted for the shooting. Eventually, someone was.
I misses him when he was little. That's my grandmother. Look, his long legs. He was not even a month old.
Ida Campbell is showing pictures of her son. He's dressed all in white, including white booties and a hat, and looks about half the size of the woman holding him.
When he was born, I had to take him back to the doctor. I remember it might have been 3 times in a week, and then 2 times they thought he had gigantism.
Now her son James Carter is 6'7", and she hasn't seen him in almost 2 years. He's in Folsom Prison up in Sacramento, serving a life sentence without parole for murdering the 2 women outside Dr. J's. He grew up with a mostly middle-class background. His grandfather was one of the first black police officers in San Diego, and his mother worked as a model when he was a kid. But as a teenager, Carter started spending time with people in the Skyline Gang, named after the neighborhood in southeast San Diego. Campbell says she isn't sure why her son started hanging out in Skyline. His dad's side of the family lived in southeast San Diego, but closer to Lincoln Park, which was rival gang territory.
I remember he came home one day with some red suede Nikes on. Horton Plaza had just opened up. And I was like, where'd you get, because I'm still on the alert of all this stuff, you know. I'm like, where'd you get those shoes from? And they're like, oh, I got them from Horton Plaza. You know you cannot wear those shoes. No, you're not doing this. You're going to go out there and get shot. You know, the usual conversation.
Red is the color associated with the Skyline Gang. Like a lot of parents whose kids end up in trouble, Campbell sees this moment as a possible turning point when she could have realized he was hanging out with the wrong people and changed the direction his life took. But of course, that's only in hindsight. Campbell says, thinking back on this moment, she wishes she'd right then sent him to live with family in Texas. But she wanted to be with him.
When you get into a crucial moment of your child's life, you really don't want to let it go for someone else to take care of it because they might not have the same love and mindset as you might have for them, you know. But that didn't work out too good, did it?
Campbell isn't sure how police narrowed in on her son as the suspect in the shooting at Dr. J's. But when detectives first came to their home to talk to him, she says she wasn't worried. That's because she was his alibi. The shooting happened on New Year's Eve when a lot of people shoot their guns at the sky to celebrate. Campbell says at around midnight, her sister-in-law heard gunshots, called her house, and asked where Carter was.
She called and I got up and I said, well, wait a minute, let me go see. So I got up and went in there and he had my grandson on his chest and he was holding the phone like I said, he's asleep. You want me to wake him up?
She says Carter was sleeping with his son. Because it took so long for Carter to be arrested and convicted, he was home for the first 8 years of his son's life.
He raised that boy. Everybody says, oh, he did such a good job. He finished school early. He was going to college while he was going to high school. He's never had a record. He's never been a Jew. He's never done anything wrong, blah, blah, blah. But my son raised him. The first 8 years of a child's life is what sets their mindset. My son raised him. He did a very good job with him. He has not been able to touch his fingernail since he was 8, and he's 18.
Pretty quickly, Campbell started to realize the case against her son was serious. Police raided their home that spring after the shooting. And then more than 6 years later, Carter was arrested. He went to trial in 2011, and Campbell was one of the witnesses. In the trial transcripts from the case, you can see the prosecutor, Robert Hickey, doesn't want to dispute her story. Instead, he suggests that maybe she just doesn't remember the timeline of events perfectly. He points out she's been confused and given different answers about when things happened in the past. Carter was found guilty, but Campbell says she believes her son will somehow get exonerated.
I just want him to get out with the mentality and the personality he had when he went in. It's like somebody going to hell, coming back out of hell, and now they're back. Oh, okay, well, we're sorry, we made a mistake. So they put you back among the living.
Tomorrow, we'll examine the case against James Carter. Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
For a longer version of that story and the rest of this series, subscribe to our podcast, San Diego Stories, or go to kpbs.org/J. Assemblymember Todd Gloria announces a new bill aimed at ending gun shows at the Del Mar Fairgrounds. At a news conference today, Gloria introduced Assembly Bill 893, which would prohibit sales of guns and ammunition there. The fairgrounds is owned by the state and came under fire from gun control activists last year for continuing to host a gun show despite recent mass shootings nationwide. Gloria says it's time for the county to make a change.
I believe that it is wrong for the state of California to profit or to benefit from the sale of firearms and ammunition. Without question, I acknowledge that gun ownership is a constitutional right in the United States, and I know that there are plenty of responsible gun owners out there. However, the fact remains that widespread accessibility to these deadly weapons produce a public safety threat that we must address. Therefore, I believe that permitting gun sales to continue on this state-owned land is not in the best interest of public safety.
The cities of Del Mar, Encinitas, Solana Beach all support ending the gun shows. San Diego County leaders respond to this week's criticism from environmentalists. They've agreed to update the regional transportation plan. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says the goal is to meet state climate goals.
The San Diego Association of Governments was supposed to update its regional plan in the fall. That plan determines where the county should make improvements to roads, transit, and highways. But as more people own cars and drive longer distances, it's getting harder and harder to cut greenhouse gas emissions to the extent required under state law. Here's SANDAG Executive Director Hassan Ikrada.
Whether you believe in global warming or not, this is about sustaining ourselves into the future and meeting the law of the land. This team, the SANDAG team, is ready to start working on our new vision today.
SANDAG officials say the new plan will meet or exceed state and local climate targets. Work on the new plan is set to begin immediately. A vote to approve it is scheduled in November 2021. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, House Democrats introduced legislation to stop President Trump's declaration of a national emergency in order to fund the construction of a wall at the southern border. Coming up at 7 on KPBS.
We're back now for the Friday Business Report, and I am joined by Mira Kopik with SDSU and Bottom Line Marketing. So, Mira, welcome.
Thanks, Ebony.
An exciting time for San Diego, especially if you're a sports fan. The Padres just this week announced that they are bringing in the baseball superstar Manny Machado for a 10-year, $300 million deal. How big of a deal is this deal?
This is a big deal. This is the biggest free agent sports deal in the history of sports to date. So it's an important piece of the puzzle for the Padres to be a championship caliber team. They're the only major league sports team left in San Diego. The ownership group is very excited about winning a championship, and this is one of the pieces of the puzzle, along with Eric Hosmer that they acquired last year as a free agent and all their farm system players that they're bringing up. This could be a good run for the Padres this year.
And this $300 million deal is, I understand, a record deal. Why put so much investment into this player, and why now? How does this fit into the larger goals?
Well, I think the Padres, have a lot of opportunity. If you look at them in context of Major League Baseball, they are lower on the attendance scale. They are lower on the payroll of all. They're 25th out of 30 teams. So they have a lot of opportunity if they want to spend on players that they can. And attendance has gone from 30,000 spectators on average in 2015 to the last 2 years pretty flat at about 26,000. So this deal creates a lot of excitement, brings in a lot of new fans, can sell a lot of sports sponsorships, and on top of that, it's going to really start selling player merchandise, which is all great for the team, but it's also great for the fact that the ownership group has been very committed to San Diego. They've done a lot to build grassroots efforts. So the Padres have a really core fan base, and they really want to expand that.
So moving on, after more than 60 years, Payless is shutting all of its stores here in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico. What does this mean for the walk-in stores?
Well, it's an interesting, retail is undergoing a major shakeup. But that specifically doesn't mean that retail is going away. There are a lot of very successful concepts like Best Buy, like Dick's Sporting Goods that are doing extraordinarily well. But in the case of Payless, a lot of it is that this is their second time in bankruptcy. They declared bankruptcy in 2017. They shut down 700 stores. They wrote off over close to $500 million in debt. Where they failed is they really missed other retail competition. DSW has a smaller footprint. Payless shoe stores are really big. They're in lower end malls. Lower to middle income working families are the ones within the economy that are still struggling. We talked last week about 5% of all auto loans are delinquent 90 days or more. A lot of consumer spending has increased in terms of credit cards. So a lot of these families are really struggling, and they're going to go to places so they get better value, like DSW, like TJ Maxx, or maybe Amazon. So that's why Payless is really struggling.
But it sounds like the formula is still at least working overseas, because all of the overseas stores, except for, Puerto Rico's not overseas, but all of the overseas stores are staying open.
Yeah, all their international franchise stores are staying open all over the world, and then their Latin American operation is staying open because in a lot of those countries, a Payless shoe store, even though it's called Payless, sells at a premium price. So it's a little different from the way it registers in North America and the U.S. and Canada.
Finally, here in the U.S., home sales have fallen to a 3-year low. What does this tell us about the economy?
It's a little bit of a paradox because the economy is going well. It's good, relatively good economic growth, independent of the government shutdown in the early part of the year. Economists are still looking at relatively strong growth and lower chance of recession this year. The issue is really that consumers are overburdened. We just mentioned how consumer debt is up. People are struggling to pay off auto loans. The requirements from a lending perspective, you got to deposit 20% to buy a house. The home prices, even though the number of sales went down, home prices went up 2.5%. So nationally, an average home costs about $250,000, and here in San Diego, over $560,000. So when you're looking at lower wage growth and higher interest rates for homes, it makes it really hard for families who are looking to buy their first home or shifting into a bigger home to make that purchase right now.
I've been speaking with Miro Kopik from SDSU and Bottom Line Marketing for the Friday Business Report. Thank you.
Thanks, Ebony.
Public disclosure for a price in local law enforcement. How ICE is using DMV records to find undocumented immigrants. And marijuana as a moneymaker on local reservations. Join us for the KPBS Roundtable tonight at 8:30.
State officials are taking on what they say is a scheme carried out by the pharmaceutical industry. California Attorney General Javier Becerra says he is getting behind new legislation that targets a practice known as pay for delay. This is when brand name drug companies pay other drug makers to delay the release of more affordable generic versions of a drug. Lawmakers say major drug companies use this tactic to curb competition while keeping the medication prices high.
We're not interested in trying to make business practices more difficult. We're trying to remove unlawful business practices, collusive business practices, which are harmful to the public.
The bill would allow justice officials to easily investigate and prosecute companies suspected of engaging in the practice. Teenage e-cigarette use is now an epidemic. According to health experts, some lawmakers want to ban the sale of all flavored tobacco products in California. Legislation that would prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products is being considered in both the State Assembly and Senate. Health experts say the tobacco industry is targeting school-aged kids with flavors like chocolate and cotton candy. Kids can become addicted to the nicotine and then eventually move on to traditional cigarettes.
Centers for Disease Control have just determined that there's been a 36% increase amongst middle and high school students in tobacco use due to the proliferation of e-cigarettes. That's 1.3 million more children who are using tobacco products in 2018 than just in 2017. So that is crisis proportions.
The legislation is expected to be debated in committee next month.
Wet weather is gone across Southern California, and that's going to be the trend for the next several days. That low pressure and that upper level trough continue to track its way into the Four Corners. Well, we've been looking at a lot of snow in places like Flagstaff. Snow will continue to spread its way through the Four Corners into the rest of tonight and into the weekend, eventually make its way into the plains. But here, once again, across Southern California, not too much to report on. We're clear and chilly for San Diego with a low of 41. But as we do talk about some rainfall totals, if you're interested, San Diego International Airport in the last 2 days, 0.22 inches of rain. Alpine, 1.44 inches of rain. And in the higher elevations, snowfall amounts range from about 9 inches to even 14 inches in some locations. So yeah, that system did bring a lot of precipitation, but now we are drying out behind that. Tonight on the chilly side and Oceanside with the low of 34, cooling down to 23 in Mount Laguna and 36 in Borrego Springs. Once again, mainly clear, remain in this dry zone for your Saturday, but with a warming trend for much of Southern California. Still going to be a bit cold back into the Four Corners. Dry into your extended forecast. So yeah, grab the sunglasses and grab a smile because no need to worry about any travel delays here across San Diego County. You're looking at a high of 60 in Oceanside, 61 in San Diego for tomorrow, 64 in Borrego Springs, and topping off at 41 in Mount Laguna for the start of your weekend. And through much of your weekend, going to remain dry here across much of the southwest, but into the eastern half of the country and even the middle portion of the country. You're going to be watching this low pressure system bring some stormy weather, snowstorm, as well as rainstorm out towards the north and southeast. Now at the coast, our temperatures will be warming up here, getting a bit closer to average in the lower 60s through your Monday, the mid to upper 60s Tuesday and Wednesday with a bit more cloud cover. Also going to be looking at that same warming trend inland in the upper 60s Sunday and Monday, then into the 70s for Tuesday and Wednesday with a bit more clouds coming your way. We start off our extended forecast here in the mountains in the 40s for your highs through Monday, and then reaching a high 51 on Tuesday. And into the deserts, well, we're topping off at 64 for Saturday, and then by Monday into the lower 70s. Reporting for KPBS News, I'm your meteorologist, Dajia Swan. Back to you.
For more of tonight's stories, go to kpbs.org. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us.